what story does your brand really tell? If you asked your customers and you asked your employees, would it be the same thing? I'm not so sure.
Welcome to Fordify Live with your host, Ford Saeks.
Well, to help answer that question, I've got my good friend and colleague, a strategic partner of mine, Chris West. He's the owner and founder of Video Narrative, and he's famous not only for creating amazing branded videos, but also for helping brands break through their limitations to get to the next level. Chris, thanks for joining the show. We were in the green room. We're talking about AI. We're talking about all this extra stuff. And we're like, hey, we should save this for the show. So this is a non-scripted show. We're live right now on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and a few other programs. This is also an audio recording that goes as a podcast on the Business Growth Show. So this is Chris West. His website for the podcast is videonarrative.com. Chris, welcome.
Hey, Ford, it's so good to be with you.
Oh, we got applause. I don't know. Alex pushed a button. All right, great. Well, so you're known for really helping tell stories. And I mean, we both know that Donald Miller has kind of coined story brand, but the concept of a brand telling a story is so essential. What do you see are some of the challenges of the organizations and the experts that you work with on the perception of what they think their brand is versus what the market thinks their brand is? And there's a gap, right?
Yeah, well, it's a beautiful question. And truly, the main answer to it is that our brain processes information in a narrative. It does. And we don't actually think to ourselves, I should tell a story here. Right. And so, for example, when I work with executives, when I work with CEOs, when I work with people as they build their brands, whether they're talking to individuals internally in their company, whether they're writing an email, whether they are, they are not saying to themselves, what story am I telling here? And the origin of my work became when I was in graduate school. I was studying narrative therapy there's a modality of therapy that allows you to help people realize that there could be a character in a story and what kind of decisions would they make. And it just gets them a little bit outside of their own problems. Like, I can't do this, I can't do this. And it starts making them think, well, what would I do if I was living a great story with my life? It's just a modality that allows therapy to be effective. And I was studying this research on the brain and how it processes long-term information. The neuroscientist said, we still don't know why, but we don't know this is the case. When a brain is hearing a story, all the brain systems come online and integrate. And I realized in that moment, because everything slowed down for me, if that's the case, if the only time the brain has all the systems come online and integrate is when it's hearing a story, or it's making up a story about what it's hearing, then we should never talk again without telling a story, right? Because
that's so profound. That's so true.
Yeah. So I always tell people go for it. Yeah.
No, I'm ready. I want to keep. I wanted to say what I was thinking. Of course, it's like my wife. Are you listening or waiting for your turn to talk? Okay, let's interrupt the guest. But what I was thinking is, as a Hall of Fame keynote speaker, working with brands and helping them grow, new speakers will come to both of us and they'll say, well, I just want to speak, but they have content, but they don't have a narrative, right? And they don't have a story. And I know that one of the things that, we did when we were in Portland and we were at that little taco shop or whatever, where you took me. And I remember you talking about, not only do you have a successful business and you're helping people build their brands and do it through video, which is so important. You were doing it way before video was even a popular medium, right? And I remember you talking about your passion about how you love whenever you speak, telling a story. And even when you were working with me on my brand, you're like, Ford, what's the story? I've heard you for 10 years, Ford, but what's the story? And you drill down and we drill down. And after about 2 hours, everybody, yes, 2 hours, it was clear, and it became clear that even though I was successful and even though I had done, I've been speaking for 34 years on the platform, you can always better your best. So if you're listening to this right now and you're thinking, no, I got this all figured out, I would encourage you to tune into what Chris is really sharing here, is because as a leader, well, it doesn't mean it's we work with professional speakers, authors, trainers, consultants, but we also work with brands. And it's so important. And I want you to go in depth a little bit on the branding part. It's not branding, but it's how you tell the story. So the concept that went through my mind, this is what we call a long road to a tiny little house, is, are you really communicating in visual pictures? And we're not talking about just video, but in what you're speaking to. So whether it's for leadership, communication, team building, management, culture, sales and marketing. You can benefit from really looking at how are you communicating, and are you communicating with stories? There's a long way to get there. Sorry.
Hey, no, that's it. And a lot of people go, okay, well, that's well and good, but how do I do it? Like, how do I tell good stories? And I would just say the main first thing is just to recognize that when you're speaking, if you want someone to remember what you say, you need to tell it in a story. Period. That's the full stop. It's just as simple as that, is to say, if you're talking and you think people remember what you're going to say, you're wrong. Right. There was a guy who came to my college when I was a sophomore in college, and he was speaking to the entire college. And I went to a school that required everyone to go to chapel every day at 11 a.m. And we heard 5 speakers a week for all 4 years. And this guy in my sophomore year came and he said, "Good morning. I'm going to tell you 3 stories, then I'm going to leave." And he told us 3 stories. And it has been 18 years for it. And I can tell you to this day, those 3 stories and the moral for them. Right? So if you're talking to your kids, if you're talking to your employees, if you are involved with anything, the main thing as a leader, for any leader listening to this, especially with someone who's building a brand, who runs a company or has a brand, you have to understand that the only time people remember what you say is if you tell it in a story format. And the reason is that the way the mind works is that it needs to keep itself alive, right? And so our limbic system, it bases everything on emotion. It has no words for processing. It has no circuitry to process words, language. It turns every word that we hear into a feeling. And why this is so important is that we think if we say these specific words, it's going to have impact. And it's just not. When you tell a story, the limbic system comes online, that lower part of the body, and it creates a sense of belonging. And you can watch a whole audience. You can watch an entire audience stop moving as soon as the speaker tells a story. And then the second the speaker comes out of the story, everyone starts moving again.
All right. So here's what I want. Keep going. Do your summary. I want to challenge you to do something. Go ahead.
Okay. But I just say, for everyone listening, it's, what are the stories that we're telling in our brands, and especially for our salespeople and stuff, like, what are some of our key stories? And especially if I'm a founder, the very first thing I do in all of our trainings of new hires is I tell the story of our company, where it began, how it began, why I do this work. And then I ask them, tell me your story. And we don't talk anything about it. I spend the first hour of every new hire just learning their story and telling them my story. And by the end of it, I literally gave this training to 6 new team members like last Monday. And I taught them some amazing stuff. And while I was teaching them stuff, people were like, holy, I did not know this or that. And then I asked them the takeaway. I asked them the takeaway at the end of their full training day. And every single one of them said, my takeaway is how I feel like I really want to be a part of this, and how much I felt like connected to this group. And they talked about connection. They talked about the feeling they had. None of them talked about any of the training we did. Right. And that's the idea, is that people they want to feel like they belong with your brand, or they want to feel like they belong with your company. And the only way to get people to feel belonging is in the limbic system. The only way to activate the limbic system is to tell a story.
All right. So while I'm going to ramble for a couple of seconds here, I want you to be thinking about a story you can tell to our audience on the importance of stories, on the importance of doing what we're talking about doing, right? I mean, we're giving content out. We're saying, okay, you need to have a story. I mean, it's like I gave my superpower book to one of my colleagues, and they read it. They're like, this was a really good book, and I got a lot of great things, but I wanted more why. And I'm like, holy, really? I mean, it's just it's a quick book, a couple hundred pages. I mean, I didn't have to go that deep into why. I mean, why should you be successful? Why should you avoid negative people? Like, I don't think I need to go that deep into the why. But you can always better your best. So what I want you to be thinking about, Chris, I want you to share a story, any story you want, do it any way you want, but I want it to be so that you're making the point of what we're talking about, right? So for those of you listening and watching, we're talking about the importance of stories, and how when you tell a story, that's when people light up and they remember. I will tell you this quick thing while you're thinking in the back of your mind. I did a copywriting event. It was called the Copywriting College, and it was a 4-day event. It was like 10 grand, and people could come and we would write copy. Now we could never do that with ChatGPT and Bard. No one would show up, right? But I remember doing this event years ago, and there was a lady from a bank, and she wasn't good at writing copy yet. And she said, we had them do an exercise, and the exercise to write the copy was, write about the most embarrassing time in your life, because it was something that would invoke emotion, and they could use, word pictures, and they could do that. And then we wrote, write about the most traumatic thing in your life. That was a mistake. That was something I should not have done. The whole room was crying. It was a shit show. Sorry, I didn't hit the button. It was not good. Like, it was just, people were talking about things that they shouldn't have, but they got the emotions going. So then I had to change it. And I said, okay, now that you've practiced those two exercises, I want you to tell me, just write a story, something that's creative to make a point. And I've never forgot this from, like you said, this story. So this lady, her name is Carrie, with a B, last name is a B. She gets up to the microphone in front of the whole audience and she says, I was walking down the street and my dog was pulling on the leash. All of a sudden, the leash yanked from my hand and I heard tires screeching and my dog yelping. When I got to my dog, it was dead. And it was the first time in my life that I was actually thankful that I was blind so I couldn't see the carnage. And I was like, holy shit, what did you just do? What? And she's like, I said, did that carry? I said, I'm so. She said, no, I just made that up. I'm like, but I've never forgot the picture of her walking the dog and the whole thing. But I mean, she just made that up and she wasn't a copywriter. And I said, okay, don't ever give me that crap again about you not being a copywriter, because I mean, why would you have a dog, poor doggy? I've got a little Labradoodle sitting over here in the corner of my office. It's like, oh, I don't want to ever think about that. But that was probably 10, 15 years ago. It was a long time ago, but I've never forgot that story. And again, now it didn't usually, as an expert, you're going to tell a story, make a point, tell a story, make a point. I mean, one of the things that you taught me was the same thing I've learned for years, but you said, okay, Ford, your keynote really needs to follow an origin story. Then you have 3 key stories where you're not the hero of the story, where somebody who's used your talents and abilities and tactics and strategies, where are the hero of the story, and then a closing story. And so that was a great narrative. And again, I'm humble enough to know I'm always bettering my best. I mean, even though I'm a Hall of Fame, which doesn't, I'm a Hall of Fame keynote speaker and my fees are good, I think you can always better your best. So that's been plenty of time for you to think now. So I'm just curious, what story would you tell now about the importance of stories? And do you have one? Putting you on the spot.
Yeah. That's all I do is think in story. So I sat down one morning at a coffee shop with a speaker who told me, I took your video, this is day one. I had never made a speaker video besides for one person before. The speaker reached out to me and I'd, just been finishing a narrative therapy program. And so he said, I took your video and I just left my corporate job and I just built like a very strong 6-figure company that's going to be 7 figures next year from your video alone. You have to tell me, why is it working so well? And I just took a napkin out, the classic napkin. And I said, because at the beginning of your video, you identify the biggest problem that your character in the story, which is your audience, is struggling with. And I found that through questions in your keynote. At 9 minutes into your keynote, you asked this question. You said, what would make someone choose you out of all the other out there? Right. And so I said, I started with that question because that's the question that is the biggest challenge for the leaders and the people that you work with. Then I brought in your credibility and I told them why you're uniquely qualified for that. I taught them through a series of your teachings what will be different. And then I showed them the results that they can expect. And I did it in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. And when someone watches that unconsciously, by the end of that, they aren't seeing a bunch of speaking clips. They're hearing a complete story. And he goes, got it. Right. And that's the way to do it, is that you're telling a story. And of course, the question is, and I have 3 kids, right? So if I know that I want my kids to remember something, I always ask myself, what is the moral, the lesson I want them to learn? And then I think, what's a story I can tell them, whether it's real or not, that will help them understand that? I never teach my kids, hey, here's what you need to know. I always tell them a story because I know they'll remember that story for years to come. And so that's the idea here, is if you've got a brand, if you've got an idea, if you're a CEO, if you're a leader, I don't care who it is, if you're a parent, the brain processes information in story, you have to tell stories.
Now, tell me some of the books in your success library that you've gained. And the reason I say this, everybody, full disclosure, when I go to Portland, Chris, what's the bookstore we go to? What was the one?
Pals.
I mean, it's like, how many stories is that place and how many books do they have? I mean,
yeah, it's like 6 stories.
Yeah. So it's one of the biggest bookstores still available. Are they still open? All right.
Yeah, they're the biggest one in the United States. It's fun. I mean, again, people come, take photos of the book they want, they go buy it on Amazon. But
right, yeah. But so to tell better stories, what are some of the books that or resources? I know that off the top of my head, Think Big, The Artist's Way. Any other books? I mean, books by Joe Dispenza. Obviously, those are a little bit more out there, but certainly helps you understand how the brain works. What resources do you recommend people do? There's, Donald Miller has StoryBrand. When I read Donald Miller's book, I'm like, this is my content too. I've been using this, but kudos to him. He packaged it and sold it. Because again, marketing's marketing at the end of the day, telling a story is a narrative. I mean, a lot of people who when I said, hey, you should go to Chris West, and they talk to you, they call me back and they're like, well, that's Donald Miller's process. I said, Donald Miller doesn't own the process, guys. I mean, he put a framework on it, but it's Caesar was telling stories. I mean, how many years do we need to go back to telling stories as a narrative? But what are some resources that you recommend if someone's wanting to build a brand or communicate more effectively telling stories?
Yeah, I think the 2 most effective books to learn it simply are, like you just said, I think StoryBrand, How to Tell a Story Brand is the book. And I think it's really important people know about that book is that Don very, very intuitively realized while he was writing a script, holy crap, this thing that they're doing in Hollywood, it would work perfect in business. And he was one of the first people to do that. He really was. He took Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey and what they teach in script writing, and he turned it into a simple 7-part formula that works so effectively that people can really get their whole clarity around it. So that's a great book to read, How to Build a Story Brand. And the other one is by Michael Margolis called Story 10X. And what's nice about Story 10X is that Michael works in the world of startups, and he helps huge companies, Facebook, like Google, tell their stories in a way that whether it's internally, hey, we have a new product and we need to do this, or we have to shift our whole company around, how are we going to tell this to all our employees? Or we have a new product, and this is Michael's specialty, that is going to break the industry. And people are going to be so resistant to it because it is so revolutionary. How do you tell a story that creates adoption? And that's where Story 10X comes in. For example, he tells the story in the book of his father was one of the people who came up with the Beyond Burger. Before, and it was so good. It juicy and tasted in it. And he showed all the people, his investors, take a bite of this. And they were like, we cannot tell it's not a burger. But unfortunately, they did such a bad job telling the story of that people wouldn't adopt it. Right. So even if it was amazing, 10 years later, Beyond Burger and others did a much better job telling the brand story of it. Plus, people were more ready for it. And then they were the ones who owned the market, even though his father was the one who came up with that.
Wow.
Figured out a way to make it
that's
good.
one book. That's one book I don't have. So I'm going to have to go get that on Amazon. I like the audiobooks because I like to listen to it on the way back and forth to my office. Well, okay. So we've been listening. This is Chris West. He's the founder and owner of Video Narrative, videonarrative.com. Chris, any closing thoughts for the listeners of Fordify Live and the Business Growth Show?
The last idea is just to ask yourself whether you're living a great story. And there is an amazing audiobook that you can listen to it's very short. It's 3 hours, but it's a live training with Chris Vogler, and it is about the hero's journey. And if you just type in Chris Vogler on audiobook, you're going to find that training. Why I'm telling you this is that he is speaking to a group of script writers, and he's telling them how you tell a great story. And if people understand that in every great story, as soon as you have a desire or an interest or something to really call you into a great adventure with your life, what happens in every great movie and what happens in all of our lives is there's something called the refusal of the call,
right? Which
is your fear or someone around you or a partner or a spouse saying like, think about that. Don't do it. And a lot of us listen to those. But the people who live great stories, they both feel and hear the refusal of the call in their bodies. They hear it from outside, and then they pass through it. And once you do, you pass something called the threshold, and instantly you move from the ordinary world to the new world, and you are now in new territory you've never been in before. And a great life is someone who's constantly passing that threshold, where if you feel like a part of you is uncomfortable a lot of the time, you're living a great story. And one of the things I've always loved about you, Ford, is that you consistently go into new territory people haven't been. And for everyone listening, our brain is obsessed with keeping us alive. That's its goal. And so it does not like new territory because it's all new circuitry. It's all new things you haven't done before. The secret of life that I've learned is to live a great story. A part of me always needs to feel uncomfortable because I'm learning or being something new. And if you don't have something that you're uncomfortable in your life right now, or something you're trying to get better at and you're sucking at, you need to live a better story. And the best, most fulfilling, purposeful experience you can have in life is to live a great story. And that causes you to go to places you're not comfortable with. I'd encourage everyone to keep crossing the threshold and living great stories of their lives.
Wow. Well, this is Ford Saeks. We are live Wednesdays at 11 a.m. Central on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. Well, Chris West, thank you so much, friend. I think you're a brother from another mother. I love talking to you. I'd love to have you back in the future on a future episode. We'll put all the links in the show notes. Again, do your due diligence. These aren't affiliate links, everybody. Well, they might be an affiliate link if I put an Amazon link, but don't stress about it. I might get 2 cents on the book or whatever you buy. But I really appreciate you telling it. And every time, I mean, I've taken notes, and every time I have an expert like you on, it just encourages the conversation. So if you're listening to this now and you're feeling stuck, what's your story? And you can change it, right? If you don't like where you are, you can change it. And that's one of the biggest things that I understand is, in the ups and downs that I go through, it's like, okay, who's in control? At the end of the day, it's me. So I have choices on whether I do it. So anyway, thanks so much for joining us today, Chris.